Welcome to the Amplified CEO with VC and serial entrepreneur Richard Stroop. Today's guest is Jim Roberts, founder of the Network for Entrepreneurs in Wilmington, a dynamic organization dedicated to fostering a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem in the greater Wilmington, North Carolina region. We discussed Jim's current assessment of the entrepreneurial market in Wilmington, his background in supporting North Carolina startup economies, and his future vision for Wilmington and North Carolina.
Jim Roberts, good morning.
Morning.
Welcome. Thank you for stopping by.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Your lovely town of
Surf City.
Topsail and Surf City.
Well,
right?
it's good that we finally got you out of the big city of Wilmington.
That's right.
Well, welcome to Surf City. We're glad to have you, and
Thank you.
swing by, and you should come more often.
Yes, definitely.
There's a lot going on here.
There's great seafood here.
A lot of awesome restaurants, a lot of really cool activities. The beaches are great. You know, it's not as crowded as Wilmington.
I drove by a retail store with a big gator right in the entrance. Like, that's my kind of place.
The gator mouth.
That's right.
Because you are a gator.
I am a proud Florida Gator. We are obnoxious.
Yeah.
Core.
Well, not so much this year in football, though. Yeah.
Had to bring that up. All right. I see how it's going to be. I see.
Let's just get right into it.
Yeah. Right.
So tell us about growing up in Florida. Your family's original from the Midwest, but you guys migrated to Florida and you went to University of Florida. So.
Yeah, so we're a Chicago family. You can tell from my nasally accent. If I spend any time around my mother, the nasally gets much stronger. When my father's parents moved from Chicago to the Tampa area, my father followed them down. It's a really interesting story. He wanted a job near their house, but the job that he was pursuing was filled by someone. So he went to the high school that guy left.
Okay.
And that's how we ended up in rural Bushnell, Florida, which is on 75 between Tampa and Gainesville.
Okay.
It's an hour and a half either way. It was more cows than people. And wow, did they not like my northern Yankee ways.
I'm sure.
In this rural.
A little bit of culture shock.
Oh, it was both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you talk really fast.
Yeah.
Like, okay. They were not basketball people. It was a football town.
Right.
So
Old South.
there was no priority
SEC
on basketball at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was culture shock. And was a very good high school student and was lucky to get into Florida. As most of my friends say, we're not sure we get into there today.
Mm.
That's how much it was recently ranked the #1 public university by the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
And it was a very tough school. So it prepared you for lots of things. But I learned a lot of social skills at the University of Florida through my fraternity. And that was probably the most important thing for me.
Now, going through high school, you played basketball, right?
Yeah.
And your dad was a basketball coach.
My dad was kind of a Bobby Knight protege in the Chicago area where Bobby Knight would have summer camps and invite my father to be one of those coaches at the summer camp.
Wow.
And then there's a famous basketball camp called 5 Star, but there was a second camp called BC All Stars, and it was a guy, Bill Cronauer, was Bill Cronauer. And Dad was a coach at those summer camps, and it was a Converse shoe camp. So it wasn't sponsored by Nike, but it was sponsored by Converse. So all of the rookies from the NBA who got Converse contracts would show up at this camp in Milledgeville, Georgia, which is really in the middle of nowhere, but it was the cheapest gym they could find. That's what I assumed.
Right.
And I guess those guys flew into Atlanta and drove up to Milledgeville. So Charles Barkley would be there, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, and these are people that you see on TV that you never thought you would meet.
Yes.
So I got to go to these camps with him as a middle schooler, and then when I got to be a sophomore, I got to go to this camp.
Yeah.
And it's one of those really humbling things where you think you're the the best player in your little town until you go to this camp.
Right. Yeah, humbling experience.
And you come back and you're like, okay, if I want that college scholarship, which is the dream, then you got to step up because there weren't many juniors. I may have been one of 2 sophomores at this camp. Otherwise, it was upperclassmen,
right?
Mostly juniors.
Okay.
And I learned quickly. I had a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must have been very impactful for you to be around such high talent. And
Well, it was
yeah.
until 2 weeks later, I tore my ACL
Oh
in the
gosh.
summer league, and
Okay.
that was kind of the end of that dream. But I still played my senior year, but I missed my whole junior year of
Just from
ball.
surgery. Yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah.
run for a year. I had a cast on for 6
Oh my
months.
God.
You know, it's a different surgery today.
Yeah.
Ended my dream. My most valuable asset is I got 3 letters from Dean Smith,
Did
the
you?
UNC basketball coach.
Right. Yeah.
And they all said the same thing. Sorry to hear about your knee. Hit the books, Dean Smith.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
you know, my dad called in a lot of favors and
Yeah.
had college coaches that he had some relationship with.
Wow.
And yeah, I had a
So you
shoebox full of
so you were
letters.
destined to go to college to play basketball. Yeah, at a high level, I imagine.
Well, I had a 3.7 GPA. I was a coach's son, and I could shoot from anywhere in the gym.
And you were
And
tall. Yeah.
I could shoot over guards as a tall guard.
Right.
Didn't play much inside at all.
Which is surprising. 'Cause,
Yeah.
you
I was the tallest
yeah.
player on my team.
Yeah.
That's not where I played.
And you're out shooting from the front.
Yeah, from yeah,
3-point
I
range.
was The 3-pointer came in right when I got into high
Yeah.
school. So yeah, that was a big plus for me.
Yeah. So I guess your dad was very influential with you as a child.
In every possible way.
Yeah.
In the 70s, it was very odd in a divorce to be given to your father, and I was given to my father. So I was raised by my father, and he was single for a couple years and then remarried. And
Yeah.
so, yes, if you see me around my father, before he passed away, I'm a replica of him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did he have like this Bobby Knight type personality?
Indeed,
Do you remember?
he did.
Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
nightmares of that. Yes, I'll never forget. Down to the red plaid ugly jackets. I mean, we really copied. We
Yeah.
watched every inning in the game.
Okay.
I don't think I missed one that was televised for a decade.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, down to the temper, if I may say. He once disagreed with a referee and started singing MICKEYMOUSE because he didn't like the ref's call.
Mhm.
And the whole gym heard it, and he got teed up and thrown out. And that was his favorite moment, one of his favorite moments of coaching.
He didn't throw any chairs on the court, did he?
No,
No.
not that I'm going to say in public. No.
I'm still waiting for that. Like, you have to one up Bobby Knight. You can't throw a chair on the court. Maybe throw a chair.
I don't know if those
one of
guys
the
would get
refs.
hired anymore if they had that kind of temper.
Not in
Yeah.
today's times.
Right.
Yeah. Now I understand you a little bit. Like,
Yeah, it's an
your
Irish-German family,
Yeah. So you're-
stubborn on both sides, right?
Yeah, but just your passion and,
Oh, yeah.
and your energy level that you bring, you saw that from a young child, and your father, and that mentality, it kind of wore off on you. And now you bring that to the Wilmington market.
A laid-back Wilmington coastal market, and you've got this intense German,
Right.
Irish, passionate guy who doesn't know the word chill. Like I'm not apathetic. I'm the opposite of apathetic. I am going to push every day because I'm
Right.
something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is I have the same ambitions that any entrepreneur has. It's just at a different, I'm
Right.
just doing something different.
Right.
Like, I fully consider myself an entrepreneur.
100%.
I just do it in a nonprofit
Right.
way, so when someone looks at me like, why are you pushing me so hard? Because, well, I need you to do what you do so I can achieve the things that I'm trying to achieve.
Exactly.
We're now the number one ecosystem in the world. Well,
Right.
who would have thought that in
Well,
2013?
It's a tremendous achievement, for you and everything that you have completed.
Yeah.
But let's dial it back. So before you became Wilmington, after you left Florida, so tell me a little bit about how you started your career and how you ended up in North Carolina.
Like everyone at the University of Florida, we moved to Atlanta as soon as we graduate because we don't want to work for Mickey Mouse. And
Yeah.
when you're in Florida, you think that's the only job
Right.
there is, right? Because at the time, Miami wasn't an innovation-based economy, and
Yeah.
Tampa was not really growing on an innovation. That was the home of the Buccaneers, and they were terrible. That's the only thing you knew
Right.
about Tampa. And again, we didn't go to Tampa from this little rural town. We
Yeah.
stayed in our lane. So our vision of the world, besides my experience in Chicago, the people around didn't travel much. So they had a very limited view on their opportunities of the
Mm.
world. So I moved to Atlanta as soon as I graduated from University of Florida. I waited tables for a while and did some retail, like worked in a CD store. And then I worked in this really odd thing called the internet store. And it was a retail environment for things you needed for the internet. So you
Okay.
would buy a modem
Mm.
because at the time computers didn't come with modems. I sound like a dinosaur. This is 96.
Yeah. So was it like Radio Shack?
The front of it, I guess, looked like a retail Radio Shack with internet things only, with
Okay.
books about the internet, discs of downloading the
Right.
browsers
Yeah.
and the routers.
Right.
But in the back was more of a classroom. So we taught how to use the internet.
Okay.
We taught HTML 101 on how to design a
Right.
website, and that's not what I was doing.
Yeah.
I could teach the how to use the internet class, but I wasn't
Right.
a coder by any sense. And I did that for a while and ran my own store for a little while. And that was right in the middle of Buckhead. And then I got contacted by the guy that I was renting my apartment from in a sublease. And he's like, "Hey, Jim, I got some bad news. You got to move out
Oh no.
because the apartment wants to sell that apartment during the Olympics.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And they're gonna charge an arm and a leg, and
Yeah.
you got to go." That didn't feel like a very welcoming,
So
place.
this was 96?
This is literally
Right.
96.
Yeah, I
This
remember
is
that.
this
Yeah.
is July of 96,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
Olympics are coming soon.
Then they had the bombing, right, at the
That
Olympics?
was, yeah.
Yeah, which
And
is
so I
yeah.
chose between Jacksonville, Florida, where I could have gone back to Florida, and I had some fraternity brothers that lived in Jacksonville. And Jacksonville had just started their NFL team, so there was a sign of some kind of economy that could support an NFL team,
Mm.
or Charlotte. And the funny story is my fraternity brothers had just come back from the Final Four that was in Charlotte,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they had a great time.
Yeah.
Well, what they didn't know was all the great bars they went to were fake storefronts. Those were dead stores
Mhm.
that they just made into bars during
Like a
the
pop-up.
Final Four,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so what they promoted was the social district was
Right.
not at all.
Right.
Right. So I chose Charlotte, and I lived there 96. And one of my first jobs, I worked for an ISP, an internet service provider. So they're the ones that provided you internet service, but they were also doing web design. That was really interesting because of my training or my experience at the
Right.
retail store. I got the job simply because I was the only applicant who emailed my resume, and everyone else was faxing it in
Mm.
or mailing it in. And I got the job simply because I knew how to do an email attachment. They're
Right.
like, "You're hired."
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I didn't really have any sales experience,
Right.
outside sales. If somebody knocks on your retail door, of course you can sell them something. But
Right.
going out to the world and networking and finding prospects and clients is a whole different experience. I was just one of those people, as you know, I'm a networker, I'm a
Mhm.
connector. And I went to every networking event the Chamber of Commerce had, to the point where people thought I was an employee of the chamber.
Wow. Okay.
And there's a very famous salesman in the Charlotte market named Jeffrey Gittimer. And he once said, if there's 100 butts there, your butt better be there too.
Yeah.
And I took that to heart. And a year and a half after moving to Charlotte, the Charlotte Observer, the biggest newspaper, the flagship newspaper, wrote an article that I was one of the 3 best networkers in the whole city. And I guess they had reached out to the chamber and says,
Who is this guy?
who do
Yeah.
you know that is an efficient, effective networker? And
Right.
somehow my name got to the paper. People their whole lives have never been in the newspaper.
Right.
And here I am 18 months in a new town, and
Yeah. Taking a bus
I'm
somewhere.
I'm in the Business Journal or the
Yeah.
Charlotte Observer.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got into the internet and into the technology space. And I got recruited to other firms because I was a connector, and because I
Right.
wasn't a high impact person, but I
Mhm.
was an influential person that could make things happen.
Right.
And I kept getting recruited to better and better jobs because I was visible in the
Mhm.
in the tech community. And I worked for a very small firm that had like 4 or 5 people. This was around 2000, and none of my prospects had any money because this is the dot-com boom. When you're reading about Atlanta or Austin or Silicon Valley or New York or in Boston, and all these dot-coms are filling up the magazine of, here's Mark Cuban building broadcast.com
Yeah.
and selling it for $2 billion.
Yeah.
Like, well, why doesn't that happen in Charlotte? And so, since none of my prospects had any money, I had the idea to come up with an event where my prospects could meet investors like yourself, right? Or they could meet the media people and get their story in the paper, and maybe that way. Or they could meet a lawyer that could write their patent. Really, all the people they needed to meet. How do you create one room where one entrepreneur can meet everyone they need to know in the ecosystem?
Right.
And that's how I started doing what I'm doing now, 25 years later.
Wow.
And that organization was called First Round.
Okay.
And it got so successful that every 6 months we had to move to a bigger restaurant. Because I would call the restaurant on a Tuesday, hey, we want to have an event. They're like, great, because Tuesday is the slowest night and they really struggle
Right.
on Tuesdays. And if I took over their restaurant, they got all the beer sales, they got all the liquor sales, they got all the food sales. I just wanted the sponsorships of the law firms and accounting firms. So the restaurant had no extra cost because we were there. They were making money that they normally wouldn't make.
Yeah.
And so we just kept moving bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know what happened? The dot-com crash,
Right.
right? The Y2K is over.
Mm-hmm.
The dot-com crash happens. And really a lot of the interest in building kind of this technology economy, this, the internet economy, all that went away. And then 9/11 happened, and that got even worse, where all the sponsors that I had in the law firms and accounting firms wanted to move upstream to work with bigger companies. They didn't think there was going to be much of a startup economy for a couple of years.
So you had a lot of energy coming into the year 2000
Yeah.
for the technology push, and there was some big technology gains.
Yeah, I mean, in Charlotte, we had Doug Lebda, who started LendingTree, which
Right.
was a big,
I
big
remember
success
that.
story.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he told a great story. Hey, Charlotte didn't welcome me because the banks didn't understand what LendingTree was trying to do. They thought we were trying to steal their
Right.
loan business, when in fact we're trying to, broaden the choices of the clients, of the people coming into our website. They now
Right.
have more choices.
That's a good point. So as you're in the middle of kind of like creating this ecosystem or networking effect in the year 2000, was it mostly financial based, since there's a lot of banks in Charlotte? And
No, not really. The fintech thing had not really taken off yet. So Doug was really one of the first ones.
right.
There was a second company that started that we didn't really know who they were, but they were coming to our events. And it turned out that was Michael Prager of a company called Avid Exchange,
Okay.
which is another fintech company that had an IPO. And they took a long time. That was a 20-year
Right.
ideation to IPO.
So what was some of the industries at that time in the year 2000 in Charlotte specifically that you were seeing kind of bubble up before the dot-com
I mean, it
bust?
was infotech, it was retail. How do you do a retail
Online.
website? Yeah.
Right. So it was all basically commerce, online
Yeah.
commerce.
Yeah.
Was most of it.
Yeah. So I was living with my future wife.
Okay.
And after the 9/11 thing happened, I really decided to close down this organization, because I was really, my sponsors were dropping by the day, and I was like, I can't. While this has been fun, it's had a lot of energy around it. I'm not making any money on trying to start a family, buy a house, all these things that adults do, right? And 3 days, although I hadn't told anyone, 3 days after I decided to close it down, I got a call from Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay.
And they had an economic development organization called Advantage West. You may not know this, but there used to be 7 regional economic development organizations in North Carolina, and they got money from the legislature every year, a big budget, millions of dollars to do economic development. So instead of relying on the state to kind of assign a new company that was a lead that might want to be in your region,
Right.
these 8 economic development organizations could do their own recruiting and their own economic development. Well, they hired me to start an entrepreneur council to basically create your own entrepreneurs, create your own companies. And that way you're not recruiting a company that 5 years later, when they
Right.
get another incentives package, pull up roots and they go to another city. This was, let's build our own and
Right.
keep them around.
So before the big push to kind of recruit or build your own network, economic development, previously, they would use those funds to recruit businesses to build plants and bring their business
Yeah,
with
what we
like
call
tax incentives.
buffalo hunting, which were exactly their
Yeah.
salary incentives of you get your salary taxes back as a company, and the
Okay.
state is kind of refunding salary taxes to the
Right.
company. If you create 1,000 jobs and the jobs are 2 times the average wage of the county, then you get these incentives for
Okay.
3 to 5 years. And then you hope that the company stays, right? You hope that the executives have grown roots and their kids are in the schools, and it makes it hard for them to move away. But
Right.
the fact is, the companies love these incentives.
So then Asheville recruited you for your
Yeah.
networking capability and success to kind of
To start
create.
an entrepreneur support
Okay.
organization.
Now this is 2002.
This is late 2002, 2003.
Okay.
I think I moved in 2003. My future ex-wife, however you want to say this now, she was from Santa Fe, New Mexico. So moving to Asheville was a dream for her. It was a very good fit for her
She didn't like Charlotte.
personal. No, it was very different. Yeah.
Did you live in downtown Charlotte or like a suburb?
I lived a mile and a half in an old neighborhood called North Davidson. It was kind of the mill town part of Charlotte where
Okay.
the old mills were.
Is that north?
It is north.
Yeah.
Yeah, between the university and downtown.
Okay.
It's 36th Street. So, it was one of those things where the artists move in and they're fixing up the old houses, and the mill village had gone away. These things were
Right.
boarded up, and people come in and invest in kind of how do you reuse what's existing there. And
Right.
it was a very interesting place to live. It was very different than kind of the downtown banking steakhouses and
Right.
bankers hours and those kind of things. This was more of where the artist lives, and there were galleries and great restaurants around, and it was an interesting place to be a young professional.
Right.
It was an interesting
And
place.
she didn't care for that.
No, the politics of Charlotte are very different than the politics of Santa Fe, New Mexico,
Okay.
which they match. Santa Fe and Asheville are
Yeah.
often seen as kind of sister cities,
Comparisons.
right?
Yeah.
So,
So she much enjoyed Asheville's.
well, it is called Sheville for a reason, right? So it's very female friendly. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you can diagnose me pretty quickly. I'm kind of a type A personality, go, go, go,
Just a
right?
little bit.
And
Yeah.
so Asheville was, hey man, we like our 5 o'clock beer, around here. And I'm like, well, 5 o'clock, you should be calling the West Coast.
It's lunchtime.
They're still open, right? Just like, what do you mean? It's
Yeah.
that's not quitting time.
Right.
You're an entrepreneur. There
Yeah.
is no end of the day,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm push, push, push. And
Yeah.
it was kind of I was a bit of a fish out of water,
Right.
but we had great events there. You'll love this event. We had our big venture capital conference. It was a full day conference. We called it Carolina Connect. So we were trying to connect Greenville and Asheville to make it a region, an economic region. So instead of calling it the North Carolina Connect Conference, it was Carolina Connect, inviting Greenville, South Carolina. We had the governor's advisor on science and technology policy was the moderator between a venture capitalist. His name was Steve Nelson. He had a venture capital fund, Wakefield Group, out of Charlotte, and a kid that he invested in that was 18 years old, and he put $3 million into this company
Wow. Yeah.
called Pinpoint Networks.
Okay.
And the kid was still at the School of Science and Math when they invested. So this kid's in a high school dorm,
Yeah.
and he's the king of the world because he just raised,
$3 million.
$3 million.
Yeah.
So I had this conversation on stage in the middle of Asheville, and you could have heard a pin drop because people in Asheville couldn't believe that
Right.
this was happening somewhere
Yeah.
in North Carolina,
Yeah.
right? Steve was from Charlotte, but the kid was from Durham. And so for whatever reason, they trusted me enough to fill a room, and those guys traveled for 4 hours out to Asheville, and
Yeah.
we had a room of 250 people.
Yeah.
And that was good credibility of, one, you could convince those people, but
Yeah.
what they said on the stage was,
Right.
this is how it works.
Yeah.
We need to make this work here. And I got a lot of credibility across the state that we were building something in Asheville.
Right. That you're starting a movement. Yeah.
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 And what a place to live. My vision, if I will, was I was trying to make Asheville into Austin because I had fallen in love with Austin. I had watched this TV show about the best parties in America, and they talked about the South by Southwest Music and Interactive Festival.
Yeah.
It was a full half an hour on these people just having a great time in Austin, Texas, and keep Austin weird. Well, Asheville's plenty weird, right?
Yeah.
So can we just steal their game plan of having these big events, and if people travel there, how many of them stay there? 'Cause my joke was I've been to 10 South by Southwest festivals in Austin, and it's 20,000 people
Right.
go to an interactive conference, and they take over the town. And every afternoon you see these really pale white people from the Midwest land on their airport from Ohio. And they get off the bus or they get out the Uber, and the sun is shining in the middle of March, and it's 80 degrees. And these people are dressed in black, and they're
Right.
dressed for Ohio.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're,
Right.
wait a minute, it's March and I don't have to wear 17 layers of black. And so they're enjoying the weather, they're enjoying the live music, and oh yeah, they're there from a business conference. I was like, I can do this. And I actually reached out to the people in Austin and said, can we have South by Southeast? Because there was North by Northwest in Portland, North by Northeast in Toronto, and South by Southwest in Austin. Well, the one missing piece is the Southeast.
Right.
And he looked at me and said, we've tried this before with other cities.
In the South.
And the guy was so frustrated. He's like, if you think you can do it, bless you. Kind of a bless your heart, get out of my way.
Do you think there's bias? I mean, because I've kind of seen this before, like in certain markets. You go to New York or Boston or Texas or California, and they're like, where are you from? North Carolina. And they're like, oh, like what? There's nothing wrong with North Carolina.
No, I think the guy was overwhelmed. Like, I'm asking him on his busiest day of the year.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Why are you asking me this big picture question when I need to focus on making sure that Charlize Theron is in the film panel, when she's supposed to be there, because that's why half of the men are in this room is to see her.
Yeah. Right.
So I think he just didn't take me seriously. The thing that changed was the organization that I worked for, Asheville, became the trophy sponsor for the film festival.
Okay.
And if you do that long enough and you're writing that check on an annual basis, you start to be taken a little more seriously.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess around 2007, the other financial crisis starts, the housing crisis starts, and I end up leaving Asheville, and I moved to Raleigh. So I kind of dropped that dream of making that possible. But I'll come back to that because in 2013, when I opened the CIE, my first speaker at the 1-year anniversary of the opening of the CIE, my first speaker was the director of the South by Southwest Interactive Festival.
Okay.
So when I called him up and I said,
You
Hugh, you remember me?
Yeah.
I bugged you and bugged you and bugged you. He's like, I'm now at the beach. How would you like to come to the beach for a couple days and be a speaker at what we're trying to do now? And he's like,
he's all in.
Just buy me an airplane ticket and a hotel room, and I'll not charge a speaking fee or anything. And he came.
So you were recruited out of Asheville. So before you left Asheville,
well, I left Raleigh. I left Asheville to come to Raleigh. We just moved. I didn't have a job lined up, but I moved. Eventually, those regional economic development partnerships lost their funding from the state. All of those basically went away and had to become independent.
Was that because of the financial crisis?
It was because a different party was in charge of the legislature.
Okay.
They just ended the regional partnerships
and
said, if you want to continue, you have to be independent and raise your own damn money.
Okay.
Which is really hard to do in Asheville, right?
Right.
So that kind of went away. The organization went away. And I was in Raleigh, and I started working for the North Carolina Department of Commerce in the International Trade Division. So how do you help North Carolina companies export? And that was my next job.
Well, going back to the Asheville comment, it's extremely hard in the Western North Carolina to kind of help seed companies. Because, I mean, there's a lot of good ideas. Like I can remember working at App State, their entrepreneurship program, they were initially focused on helping seed companies or ideas. for Western North Carolina or have a Western North Carolina theme. And of course, I'm like, well, what's that? What kind of industry? So it just, there's not a whole lot there, you know.
Well, we had one company, it was called Builder Radius. And Builder Radius was kind of like if you want to buy an existing house. So if somebody's already lived in it, it may be 100 years old, it may be 10 years old. Before you buy that house, you could go onto this database and search the permits that have been pulled for that house on what's been added. So suddenly this house has a very nice screened-in porch, but you look at the permits and that wasn't done under permit, right? So that's what this house would, this website would do, was not just in Asheville, but it was a nationwide organization, and but they were based in Asheville and the headquarters. Yeah, and that's what this Builder Radius company did. So they were kind of the first company that had, you know, 12 to 25 employees that we worked with.
That was based in Asheville, or
it was. There was one of the first companies that I remember working with that literally had the keg in the office at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
You know, the tap went on at 5 o'clock. And obviously that's commonplace now.
Yeah.
Even in great companies like Pendo, downtown Raleigh, they kind of make it a priority to have a beer window in the kitchen of the business.
Right.
There's a little 1-by-1 window where a nice little cold pint can come right through. A lot of the Triangle tech executives have their beach house in the area. That makes it easy for me to invite them down to come and speak at our events. I mean, it's a real plus for us, because I'd have to say it's probably something Greensboro doesn't have. Right? They don't have, oh, come to your second house and enjoy a weekend.
It reminds me of a story. I had breakfast with a prominent lawyer in Wilmington earlier this week, and he's part of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, or at least he was. And he mentioned the same thing, where he rented the battleship for July 3rd, and he had, I think it was a pig roast or something, some kind of an event, where he invited some of these people that he knew they would be in the area on vacation.
Right.
And a lot of YPOers were here at the time, and he had a huge turnout.
Right.
And it was successful in what he was trying to accomplish.
Well, that's the same thing we do during Azalea Festival. That's when we have our investor conference, because we have things for them to do other than our event. Right. So if I just had an event in the middle of a random week, I don't think I would have had 67 investors come to our event in April from out of town, out of state. I mean, we had an event last year. We had people from 8 different states come to Wilmington for one of our events.
Wow.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
That shows you're bringing real talent that they want to hear from.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, we're in a beach town. No, these guys could have gone to any beach town, but it was the quality of the speakers that we had for that event.
So taking the success that you had in Charlotte, taking that momentum to Asheville, and then levering that into Raleigh. Now you've kind of done a circle in the state, and you've touched different aspects within legislature and the private sector and public sector. And then you come to Wilmington. Did you move to Wilmington to start the CIA at UNC Wilmington?
So if I can go back one step, I worked for the North Carolina Biotech Center. They had a spin-out organization called the Center of Innovation for Nanobio.
Okay.
So how do you use nanotechnology to deliver drugs, especially to the brain, because it has to be that small to be able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. We eventually broadened it out to nanotech for anything, because nanobiotech just was the pun would be too small.
Yeah.
Nanotech was too small to have an organization just around nanobio. And again, I just had great events. Even I was telling somebody recently, we actually had a former FDA director of the FDA as one of our speakers at a VIP breakfast that I held. And that was gold, because everyone wanted to not just be there, but they wanted to sponsor it. They would do anything to get into that room. It wasn't part of the full conference. It was a VIP breakfast event before the bigger event, and the guy wasn't going to be at the bigger event. So if you wanted to meet him, you had to be, and that helped me sell sponsorships. It created that buzz, that FOMO, if you will, the fear of missing out. And one of the sponsors of that was a gentleman by the name of Brian McMurdy. And Brian McMurdy is from Wrightsville. He's actually a Notre Dame grad. He's a Midwest guy, but he lives here. and he had a recruiting firm. And it turns out he put in his recruiting firm, he put the chancellor of UNCW into that position.
Okay.
Like they hired him to find a chancellor, and
Right.
he was
Like a search committee.
yeah. So I knew that this CIE was coming. I knew they needed a director of entrepreneurship, and they were creating a co-working space, incubator, accelerator.
Mhm.
They were using all of the terms, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted that job, right? Because who doesn't want to live at the beach? Again, as a Florida kid, who
Yeah.
doesn't want to live at the beach? Even though
Right.
I'm Irish and pale and heavy and all bald and all those things, right? So I was applying for this job, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And what turned out was the job application required an MBA,
Mhm.
and I didn't stick around Florida to get my MBA. So I met Brian at one of our events, and he's look at me. He's like, Jim, what are you look really down. What's wrong? You look really sad. And I was like, well, I'm really trying to get this job
Mhm.
at UNCW. And his eyes lit up. He's like, I can get you an interview tomorrow. And so that's how I got to UNCW. Was he reached out to the chancellor that he obviously had a personal relationship with,
Mhm.
and got me an interview. And so I was a finalist. And in my final interview, I gave the chancellor this book called Startup Communities by Brad Feld. Brad Feld is the founder of Techstars in
Right.
Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I said, Chancellor, you don't know me very well, but when I tell you this, I want you to believe it. If in this book, if this is what you want to happen in Wilmington, I'm the right person for the job.
Mhm.
And I got the job the next day.
Awesome. Yeah.
And so, he saw the passion, right? That
Oh,
we're,
yeah.
we're talking about it right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the passion that I have for entrepreneurship, and he saw it, and that's what I guess made the difference in the final round of interviews.
So what year is this?
This is 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got hired at UNC Wilmington, and you're launching the CIE.
So they bought an old real estate building that was also a real estate school.
Mhm.
So the room where you had your event with me
Right.
for the deep dive at the CIE,
Mhm.
that used to be a real estate school.
Okay.
And it was a pretty ugly building. It was
Yeah.
not an
It's
attractive
almost
building.
like a strip mall, right
Yeah.
in front of campus.
Yeah. I mean, there's a mattress store right next door. There was a
Yeah.
Burger King.
Yeah.
There's a,
Yeah.
a fossil of a Kmart store, right? And there's the only thing that's alive is the Chili's down the street. And
Right.
I'm not sure how much longer that's going to last, right? So it wasn't, you really had to add the energy to the building. It wasn't a building that had its own energy. It's right on College Road, so it's visible.
Yeah.
You can tell people where it is, but that doesn't mean people know what it is.
Mhm.
Like, are you the thing next to the Burger King? And so, I was telling somebody else, they had to fix it up, and they let me have my vision on what I wanted to do. So we knocked down some walls.
Mhm.
We made a co-working space. So we added walls. We made clear glass walls that you could write on,
Mhm.
so people could see inside, but you could still use it as kind of a whiteboard, although
Right.
you were writing on glass, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, somebody said it looked like a baby nursery at a hospital because you were looking in like
Yeah.
it was a baby incubator instead of
Yeah.
a startup incubator. And
Yeah.
maybe we made some bad decisions, but it's still mostly the same. Really, the only difference now is the big video board in the classroom,
Right.
right? That's
Yeah.
really the only big difference. So because it was under renovation, I had 6 meetings of coffee meetings across the street because the Harris Teeter had a Port City Java.
Mhm.
And that's where I had our meetings. And that's actually where I met the Taylor family that had a company that they were just starting. It was a father and son team, and they had a company called Next Glass. Have you heard about Next Glass?
Mm-mm.
So Next Glass George was a wine drinker, and he was tired of overpaying on restaurant menus because the price made it sound like it was a great glass of wine.
Mhm.
The description on the menu made it sound like a great glass of wine. But when you pay $100 for a bottle of wine and it's terrible, you can't really get a refund on that, right?
Right.
So he decided to create an app that would help you. If the wine list didn't have a bottle that you knew that you liked, and you liked the year and you liked the vintage, the app would tell you the likelihood of the wines that are on the menu, say there's an 80% chance that you'll like this bottle of wine based on what you've had in the past and other people's description of this wine. There's a really good likelihood that you'll enjoy it, which delivers value to you, right? And that's how Next Glass was started. So I met the Taylor family at that coffee shop, and then they paid the monthly fee like a tenant, but they actually had their own offices. So they helped us by being involved in what we were doing, but they never really had an office inside the CIE. And they were the big first success story of the Wilmington ecosystem that wasn't related to Live Oak. Like Encino had started. Really, the reason the job at the CIE was open was because they had an internal council at the business school, the Cameron School of Business at UNCW. But the guy left that job to be the VP of marketing at Encino. He was one of the 5 founders of Encino.
Okay, so Encino was launched around about the same time CIE was
Probably
launching.
6 months before.
Okay.
But it was really under wraps. Like no one knew. They knew they were using Salesforce. They knew it was fintech related. They knew it was related to loans, but no one really knew. They knew it had real potential because of the smart people that were involved.
This was 2012, 13.
Yep.
Okay, right before the big AWS. Cloud movement started happening.
Yeah. So that's why the job. I mean, maybe if that guy doesn't start Encino, maybe I'd never make it to Wilmington.
Right.
Maybe he's the guy who, his name was Jonathan Rowe, and he's the guy that starts CIE.
Yeah, I met Jonathan. Yeah, I've seen him over at Hanify a few times. So.
Super smart guy.
Yeah. It's brilliant. All right, so you launch CIE, you get it off the ground.
Yep. And the very first event that we have is the grand opening, and it's on the week after Labor Day, because I believe in having events right after holidays, because no one has anything on there. Everyone tries to cram things in right before the holiday. No one has any idea what's going on afterwards. So we did it the Thursday after Labor Day, September 8th. And it was packed because everyone was curious about what this was, because they loved the council. They loved the Entrepreneur Council when it was on their business school, but this was going to be a whole different beast. So it had the UNCW is very influential around town. They could really get the articles written to promote things. And there was a lot of anticipation on this. So it was a full house. And I was nervous because I didn't know, this is not my event, right?
Yeah.
These aren't my people yet. I don't know I know the chancellor and my friend, the chief of staff, and I know some of the people, but there's 95% of the room that I have no idea who they are, or if they're going to like me, or if they like Yankees, or they don't. My first opening speaker was the same guy that was on the panel in Asheville as the moderator when he was the governor of science, the governor's advisor on science and technology policy. And I had him talk about this report he had called the Innovation Index, which shows how is your county competing with other counties in North Carolina on patents earned, venture capital raised, what part of your economy is based on technology jobs, what is the average pay of those jobs, and this data that kind of shows the maturity of your innovation ecosystem. And it was not a very positive report. That's why I was hired, was to change this, because there weren't many patents around Wilmington, because I don't think we had a patent lawyer in town. Like, why would that person exist? Like, why would they be in Wilmington? Because it's not a innovation hub, right?
Well, supply demand, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and there really wasn't a venture capital firm. There was an angel investor network, the Wilmington Investor Network, WIN, had been around for a long time, but they did not have a lot of local deal flow, right? What were they going to invest in? So they were investing quite a bit in out of town. They were very involved in the Angel Capital Association. And so they could invest in deals in other groups. They could contact Boston and, hey, Boston, what kind of deal flow do you have? And we'll send our money up there.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want, right? You want it to be invested locally. And so these are all things that we've got to work on. But I wanted him to table set and say, if your expectation, if you think we're the number 8 ecosystem because we're the 8th largest city in North Carolina, The fact is we're 24th in some of these rankings. Like, we're behind very small cities that are 2 hours from any university. Why do they have more going on in those cities? And so I had to set that expectation. I had to set that understanding, because if you think we're here and we're doing things that are below that, then you would get very frustrated that you're not seeing progress.
Well,
I need to say, we're down here,
Yeah.
and this is how we're going to show progress, and we're going to make an impact.
Well, like a basketball coach, you have to set a sense of
The
urgency.
basics.
Right? Yeah, this is where you're at today, and this is where we're going tomorrow. But
That's
here's
a
how
very
we have
good
to get
point.
there. Yeah.
When we moved to Florida, the team that my dad inherited, the best shooter walked every time he shot the ball. He took a shuffle step. My dad's looking around going, that's a travel. That's a walk.
Yeah.
That's a turnover every time you touch the ball.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Those are the things that he had to change. Well, I had to change some of the basics of an ecosystem, the basics of understanding what investors want, the basics of understanding of what it takes to make an impression on an investor. You know, what does the market want outside of Wilmington?
Yeah.
You know, to scale a company, you can't just sell in Wilmington and New Hanover County. You've got to sell to Charleston, to Atlanta.
Yeah.
How do you get into those markets?
Yeah. Well, just speaking on the basketball analogy, it sounds like your dad was a big fan of Hoosiers, the movie.
Yes.
And there's a lot of like parallels in the startup community, you know, and the big theme in Hoosiers was you got to tear it down, build it back up. You know, you've got to just reset the whole thing. And sometimes you have to lay people out and, you know, bring others in and change the culture and set the expectation. And
We call it an ugly baby.
right.
Your startup is an ugly baby.
Yeah.
We need to change the outfit that the baby is wearing. We need to, you know, put on some skin cream to take off the visible pimples.
Right.
You know, these are things that we got to do to make you more presentable to the marketplace.
Right.
And we can get into that later, but we do have an event called the Tough Love event. And that's exactly what we do is they come in with a practice presentation that we've given them everything we want to see on these 10 slides. And then they come in and they do their version of it, and they've ignored most of the advice that are, you know, that
How many
we've given them.
events do you actually?
We have an event
sponsor
per month, usually.
One a month.
One a month.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're private events, so they're not audience events. It
Yeah.
depends on, you know, if there's a lot of venture capital conferences coming up that our entrepreneurs have applied for and maybe been accepted into, then we'll have this investor presentation skills event. That's not an audience event. We're not there to embarrass the entrepreneur, but we also have to get our message through very directly that presentation that you think you practiced at home, that's not going to get the deal done.
Right.
So we have to break it down slide by slide. Yeah, we call that our Tough Love event.
Okay. Now, did you start this at CIE or this
The
is
Tough Love
something-
event actually started in Asheville because they were very frustrated that the entrepreneurs were frustrated that they weren't raising capital. And we all knew why they weren't raising capital.
Because the pitch wasn't great. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I brought one of my mentors from the Raleigh market, and I paid him a nice little day stipend. And the 4 companies that had been trying to raise money for a year, but had not raised much at all, within 6 months had raised, you know, $1.3 million. And so I knew that this training would really have an impact. So it's just come with me at every stop, you know, of every city that I've gone with.
How long were you at CIE?
Again, I was hired before the building opened. So I was hired in April 2013 and left in May of 2015.
Okay. So in that 2-year period, you had it launched and now your system was up and running, and you left to start the new
Network for Entrepreneurs in Wilmington. So in the Raleigh market is actually one of the original entrepreneur support organizations in the world. It's called the CED. They've recently changed their name to the Center for Entrepreneur Development. And it's a nonprofit that's meant to nurture entrepreneurship to the point where it is entrepreneurship development is economic development. So I think we all know that Raleigh-Durham is one of the top 10 most innovative cities in America. and a very strong startup ecosystem. And can I do that on an independent basis as an independent nonprofit in Wilmington outside of an institution? It's pretty brave to do it as an independent when you have a well-recognized institution like the Wilmington Chamber or UNCW or an economic development organization, but can you do it and build enough sponsor support to do it independently? And that was really difficult to do, and
It's a big challenge.
still difficult now.
Right. So that was the goal and the target. So what was the initial steps to?
Well, the initial step was I tried to recruit a co-working space from Raleigh to expand to Wilmington. And I actually got an agreement. They agreed to do it, but they didn't really agree to pay me a salary that was worth, because the UNCW job was a really good job. It's a great job and a great salary and a great benefits. And the co-working space wanted to pay me less than half of what I was making at UNCW. And not for nothing, but Wilmington's not a cheap place to live, right? You can't live on that.
Was it your decision to leave the CIA if you had a great?
No, there was a break. That's never been explained to me. So but there was a break.
So they went a different path.
Yeah. And so I actually kind of stuck around to kind of stick it to them, right? Because I knew what I was building. I knew the progress. Even though you didn't see job announcements of 50 people, I knew what Next Glass was building. I saw the determination that.
I mean, you still have a great relationship.
George Taylor I would see him leave an event at night and drive to Richmond and pick up an angel check and come back to make payroll. And I was like, okay, that dude gets it. Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to stick around. And can you build an innovation economy at the beach where people want to live? You know, with all due respect to Raleigh, Durham, it's not a fun place to live if you're a young adult. It's a great place to raise a family. There's great schools and all that. And if you're an NC State grad or if you're a UNC grad and you graduate, you can actually live in that apartment as long as you want to, probably until you get married with your 3 roommates, right? So it's pretty affordable, but the beach is not a cheap place to live. So I just wanted to kind of bet on myself, if you will, and like an entrepreneur does. And that's why I stayed, because I knew what I was building. I knew it was going to work because people were coming from other cities to attend our events. Our entrepreneurs are starting to win the North Carolina Technology Awards. I tell that story where George Taylor and Kurt Taylor from Next Glass, they were nominated for Best Startup of the State of North Carolina from the North Carolina Technology Awards. And it was really one of the last awards of the night. And so the person who's doing the narrating of the event says, from Wilmington, North Carolina, there's an app that can tell you what wine you will like. And these tables are 1 or 2 bottles deep. It's the end of the night. So they've been drinking probably bad wine. Right. You can hear people take out their phone, get up from their chairs and try to download the app in the middle of the awards event. And I was like,
gold.
I know that we just woke up 800 people on the potential of the beach and having an innovation economy at the beach because we're just 2.5 hours from Raleigh, Durham, which somebody recently said we've developed an umbilical cord from the biggest ecosystem to the beach. So our entrepreneurs can use that same ecosystem. And it's not, hey, you're not from here, you can't use our stuff. I came with those relationships with those organizations from Raleigh when I moved to Wilmington. And so our entrepreneurs were welcome. I try to point this out to other people when they're developing ecosystems. Those people have quotas too. They have to sell sponsorships. They have to fill seats for those events. They make money. That's their fundraiser. So when I bring up 20 people from Wilmington for an awards event or an investor event, that's another, $500 a ticket, 20 people. They appreciate that. That's real income to them.
Absolutely. So tell me, what's the current economic situation of Wilmington as far as your ecosystem? Like, where are we at today?
We've come a long way. What used to take us 2 years in venture capital is now done in a quarter.
Okay.
So companies like Ohanafy, companies like Simply, companies like Aperture,
Mhm.
companies like Opioid, companies like Boreas Monitoring, companies like Nareem,
Mhm.
those are all raising money. They're all growing.
Mhm.
They're all employing people. They're all paying good wages. And we're now the number 2 ecosystem in North Carolina
Right.
behind Raleigh Durham,
Okay.
past Charlotte at
Yeah.
875,000 people in Charlotte.
How did you do it? Like, what's the key success factor,
Well,
you think?
I call it the coastal corridor. I call it that umbilical cord. Opioid is challenge raising money because they're not serial entrepreneurs. They haven't really done this kind of
Mhm.
scalable company before. They, instead of raising money, they need an SBIR grant from the federal government. So an
Mhm.
innovation, a small business innovation research grant, and that
Mhm.
could be $250,000 or
Mhm.
$2.5 million, right?
Right.
Depending on what phase you get.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're struggling to raise money, but you have something that's novel, the federal government is probably looking for a solution on the opioid crisis, which they
Mhm.
are, because it's a top 5 problem in America.
Mhm.
And you have a novel solution to that, you can go to the government and get one of these grants, but it only has a 13% chance that you win it on your first application.
Right.
So there are experts in the Raleigh Durham market. There's actually a woman who has a consulting firm that's a Fortune 5,000
Mhm.
kind of Inc. 5,000 winner,
Mhm.
and that's all she does
Is
is
Sibbers?
consult with companies on
Yeah.
SBIR grants.
Yeah.
And so
I've used one in Texas.
the First Flight
Yeah.
Venture Center, which is in Durham, which is actually the second oldest building in the Research Triangle Park, is their kind of hard science incubator.
Mhm.
So it's life sciences, hard sciences. It's the stuff that we don't have around here too
Mhm.
much yet. They have a consulting contract with this lady who does SBIR consulting,
Mhm.
and they brought a workshop to Wilmington at my invitation.
Mhm.
Hey, I know we don't do this a lot. I'm really good at filling a room. If you'll trust me, bring this workshop to Wilmington and we'll make the most of it.
Mhm.
Right? And David attended that workshop.
Mhm.
The fire went off, the light went off in his head. He began traveling up to First Flight for more and more workshops, and eventually he wins this $250,000 grant, which leads to later a $2.7 million grant.
Okay. So he went
That's
the
real money,
yeah.
right?
So he went the Sibber route and
Yeah.
used the funds
So
to
instead of,
yeah.
if you're getting a $250,000 grant, that's like raising money from 10 angels. And
Right.
who knows how long that takes in Wilmington,
Right.
right?
Right.
But if you get one of these grants and you invest the time and you do it right, and then the validation of the grant leads to
Yeah.
more interest from the investors.
Do you believe there's bias from a venture capital point of view where they only want to put money to work in their remote areas?
Yes. But not only that, it's also in, if I may, the conservative South, where investors are very conservative, not like the Silicon Valley or the Boston or New York, is they love serial entrepreneurs that they know they can get the band back together. And, 2 years after an exit, they
Right.
start another company and the investors put their money right back in because
Yeah.
they know 7 years from then they'll probably get another exit. And
Right.
that really makes a lot of common sense, but it makes it really difficult to be a first-time founder.
Even in today's remote work environment, you
Yeah.
still believe venture capital would like to keep control over their funds and have it somewhat close by. Here's a story. So, a company we invested in, I did personally, seed funding. They were based in Maryland. And about, I would say 13 months later, they got an A round from some ex Sequoia Capital guys who
Nice.
were recruited by Governor Kasich at the time
Right,
to go to Columbus, Ohio.
right.
I think it's called Drive Capital. And anyway, Drive did the A round, but one of the requirements was you have to move to Columbus because there's tax incentives. So the governor obviously wants to bring business to the state. So I think if North Carolina ever became serious about, trying to build up a venture capital network that rivals something like Boston, New York, or, Silicon Valley, or even Austin at some point, is they have to provide incentives. They have to, build in some type of ideas where, okay, VC, you'll come in, you'll make your investments, but I want you to bring that
Right,
company here
right.
to generate tax revenue.
Well, something our investors really want is we had an angel investor tax credit. That was a 25% write-off right off the top as a tax credit from your taxes. So your state taxes. In 2016, the state legislature got rid of all those advantages and we wiped our investor credit out. There's been a fight every year to try to get it back because our surrounding states have it. South Carolina, I believe, went to 35%. I think Maryland's at least 50%. We would really like to have that back. That would make a difference, a small impact.
Well, I think there's a negative connotation to government spending, whether it's state or federal. Like, oh gosh, you're spending this money on what? Really these crazy ideas, or I wouldn't say wasteful, but I guess it just depends on the opinion of the person whether I wouldn't spend the money on that or not. But I think we can all agree providing incentives for startups, even the first, couple years, just getting it off the ground, where they can write off some of those early investments
Mhm.
and try to become profitability. Because you got that J curve, right? You go down, you're negative for a period of time, but then you turn a corner and become profitable. And that J curve really drives the valuation and whether you get an investment or not. I think that's where the state needs to focus some of their attention going forward, is that if they really want to build that type of economic powerhouse, from venture capital, they have to do some more incentives that way.
I think some states actually match some venture capital investments,
Mhm.
meaning if a firm puts money in, the state won't do it by themselves, but they'll match the investment that the firm makes.
Right.
But just legislators really they just don't want to be in the business of picking winners and
I
losers. They get
mean,
really scared about that because here's the objection is mostly in rural areas.
mm,
We don't have these kind of innovators in our backyard. So this tax credit only benefits the urban areas.
right.
Yeah.
Centralized talent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, counties and states are used to giving tax abatements and incentives to bring factories and to bring companies here, right? To build their factories and employ, certain number of people like you mentioned before. There's no reason they couldn't do something similar to create a company,
I think
right?
it'd be interesting if they found an innovator that maybe was from their town and they found a way to recruit them back, like
Right.
a kind of a homecoming of,
Yeah.
okay, I'll use Scott Wingo as an example. Scott Wingo is actually from South Carolina.
Mhm.
What if South Carolina reached out to Mr. Wingo and said, we'd love to have you back in South Carolina.
Mhm.
We will, make a certain investment in your next company if you, come back home because brain drain is a really challenging problem for these cities. That's what's been so great about Wilmington is those people are now coming back. The UNCW graduates are flocking back to
Right.
Wilmington
Well,
because they never really wanted to leave. It
it's
wasn't
cheaper. Think about today's time. If a college graduate wants to take a job in California, New
yeah,
York, or
yeah,
Boston, they're going to pay X dollars for
right.
rent, food, water supply, and you have salary, then what money they got left over after 401k or whatever. But now they can get a similar job. Maybe the
Right.
salary is a little bit different
Right.
here, but your lifestyle is much better. It's cheaper, and you're close to your environment.
Well,
So,
it's easier if you've married, probably had a child and the family's here and, grandma can help with the child raising.
right.
That's really what happened in my family is I had a lifelong agreement with my mother. As soon as I had a child, she would move to the area and help me with my son.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what's happening in Charlotte is
Mm.
there's a lot of young professionals in the Charlotte area and the grandparents are moving to Charlotte to be near
Mhm.
the kids.
Wilmington. So great success that you've had so far. What's not working, in your opinion?
We still need a lot more entrepreneurs. We need to find the hungry entrepreneurs that want to live at the coast. We have a lot of people that want the coastal lifestyle, but do they really have the fire in the belly to grind out scaling a startup of that relentless that call at 6 p.m. to the West Coast when all your buddies are already at the bar for happy hour? Who's going to be the guys and women who make 3 extra calls to land a new prospect, to land that big client where it allows you to hire 5 to 10 new employees or,
Yeah.
that is we're still struggling to find those gut hungry grinders that, if you follow, I love following our entrepreneurs on LinkedIn because people like Scott Monroe has a company called Essential Personnel, and they sell software to fire departments and police departments. And you see them on the road, and you see that once a week announcement. Hey, we want to welcome the Boston Fire Department to the Essential Personnel. Nothing makes me happier, right? Charles Davis has a company called Easy Vote Solutions, and they have software for the voting process. It's not online voting, it's the process of running elections. And the brother is out there selling Ron Davis, and we'd like to welcome, Sumter County, Florida to the Easy Vote family. And I love that. I like it, and I try to repost it every time I see one of those. And it just, because I've worked with those guys, as I said recently, in what I do, the entrepreneurs become my friends because I'm spending so much time with them. I'm invested in their future.
Right.
So they're not just my professional colleagues, but they're let's go celebrate that contract. Let's go have a beer. I'll buy dinner. You know.
So do you think the founder, the CEO, doesn't have the same drive here that they would, say, in Boston?
I think it's a very different personality that lives at the coast, that lives in the urban cores.
Or is it the employees, or both?
No, it's the founders.
Okay.
Yeah. In your because
opinion.
that's who I work. I don't work too much with the everyday employees.
Right.
I may see the salesperson, the VP of sales, like a Brandon Walker was at Untapped, but I'm mostly dealing with the founders. I'm not traveling to their offices. These are entrepreneurs that are coming to my events.
You just don't think they have a sense of urgency.
I wouldn't say all of them. I'm not saying that's a blanket statement. I'm saying I need a plane load of those entrepreneurs and that's why I do so much on media relations. That's why I'm trying to get the word out in Atlanta that we're the number one ecosystem. Well, if you're stuck on I-40 or I-85 for 3 hours on the way to work and 3 hours after work, you're probably going to look around going, can I be somewhere else? And I'd rather do something for the other, those hours I'm stuck in traffic. I'd really rather do something else.
How do you relate to the people, like there are some high profile individuals that work in other areas, whether it be Raleigh or DC or Atlanta, and they come to this area for vacation. So they come here to unwind and to kind of, unplug, so to speak. But at the same time, you want to tap into their energy and their network and their capability into helping kind of grow this thriving market. How do you balance that?
Well, they're usually coming to Wilmington because they know somebody here. Like they're vacationing with an old friend that they went to college with that lives here. That's why they're coming to Wilmington. They're not throwing a dart at the dartboard going, I'm going to go to Wilmington. We don't have the same social options that a Myrtle Beach or a Charleston has. So to come to Wilmington, you're probably visiting somebody that you know. So those are the people that say, hey, my buddy ran this VC firm up in Boston, or he runs a big software company. Would you like to join us for a beer or a coffee or a breakfast? And that's how I usually meet those people.
Okay.
Or somebody's looking to relocate. They reach out to me. They read my stuff on LinkedIn. I get reached out to LinkedIn.
You're very active.
Probably not as much as you do as an investor, but I get a lot of, hey, I'm a North Carolina native. I've been in Florida for 25 years, and Florida is crazy. So we're thinking about what are called halfbackers. We're thinking about coming back to halfway back to the north, or I'm coming back home. I like what you're posting. I mean, I'm pretty out there as far as often as I post, but I'm not lying about our accomplishments. I'm saying, here's the proof, as the kids say, here are the receipts. When these big rankings came out, that's not data we're supplying to Startup Genome and Startup Blink. They're finding their own data. So I'm not lying about the things that we've accomplished.
And you've had some high profile VCs like Steve Case's group come through.
Yeah, Revolution Capital, Rise of the Rest. And when they post about their visit to Wilmington in their newsletter, and that newsletter goes internationally.
Did they actually deploy any capital here?
No.
Do we know why?
I mean, they're not going to just have a dinner and drop a check while they're in town. There's relationship building. we get them to get to know the people at Canopy? So maybe Canopy invites them back to Wilmington when they have their FinTech at the Beach event on an annual basis, and maybe they come to one of my events and they speak at one of my events, but they get involved with other people. We have some very high people. We have a guy here named Steve Vafier, who is an investor in Facebook and Airbnb, and he's got real credibility. He wrote a great post. He did a great podcast on how Live Oak Bank has impacted the city of Wilmington, and Encino has an IPO, and Aperture is on the same track, and Canopy Ventures is, by the way, the largest venture capital fund in the South at $750 million. You know, a city with 125,000 people has a $750 million.
That's Neil Underwood, right?
Yes.
Is he anchored Canopy out of Washington or Wilmington?
It's Wilmington. I think they do it Washington for political reasons.
Like a remote office?
Neil's a big UNC fan, and he's a great personality.
Yeah, but he's also an investor in Ohanafy.
Yeah.
So given the success of your achievements in your career, you kind of build that momentum and bring all that synergy, plus the CIE and the impact UNC Wilmington is trying to do with entrepreneurship, which is phenomenal. And I told my App State folks, I'm like, you really need to... The first day I went and met Heather, I took some pictures and I sent some to my buddy. I'm like, you guys need to look at this. Like they're doing it right. You know, they're really bleeding entrepreneurship throughout the entire university, which is awesome.
Right.
To get it, you know, young kids really thinking about it. Plus Live Oak Bank and Canopy and Encino. So
in Aperture.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like groundswell momentum that's really helping some of these other smaller companies.
Well, it helps when somebody visits and they're driving down Front Street and they see restaurant, bar, Ohanafy software. Like, what does that company do? And, you know, that's one of the nicest offices downtown.
Well,
and
it was.
Those nice little rooftop.
They moved out.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's the old untapped office.
Yeah.
Right. And there, you know, there's 100 young professionals working in downtown making between $85,000 and $115,000, and they can go to whatever nice restaurant they want at lunch and dinner, right? It's not, if I may, the service economy tourism jobs where it's paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
You know, these are real jobs and jobs that UNCW graduates want to stick around for.
Right. Well, me personally, as an investor, I get a lot of questions, you know, back in DC, like, what in the heck are you doing investing in Wilmington?
Right.
Like, what did you see, you know? And
well, let me tell you, there's some really bright UNCW students who learned under the best management you can imagine at Live Oak Bank and Encino, and they've got a new company. So, you know, I mean, it's kind of a bargain.
When I read about the article of Ohanafy, which, you know, was from a connection that you made in the Raleigh Business Journal, I had always been looking for something software related down here because it was all real estate, you know, from my point of view.
Right.
And, you know, I was very impressed from day one. Went over there, talked to the founders, talked to the management team, talked to some of the developers, looked at the code. You know, the application itself was just phenomenal. And now after spending, you know, time with them and really understanding the employees, super impressed with the graduates of UNC Wilmington. And of course they are.
I mean, you're very vocal in your support of Ohanafy more than most people, most investors I see talk about portfolio clients. You're very optimistic about their long-term success.
Yeah, 100%. Right? But just the people that they hire, you know, whether they're from NC State, UNC, or UNC Wilmington. Because I mean, being from Northern Virginia or relocating from Carolina to Northern Virginia, you see a lot of Virginia Tech, UVA, JMU, Penn State, Maryland graduates. And you get accustomed seeing, okay, well, that's their quality and what their level of output and knowledge and skill set. And then you come here and you're like, oh my God, it's just as good.
Well, UNCW doesn't have a very high profile. You know, there's not a football team that you see on Saturdays, right? The big win was last year beating Kentucky in basketball. And most people don't know that the Kentucky basketball coach played 1 year at UNCW, John Calipari, who's now at Arkansas. But last year, UNCW got a little revenge game in Kentucky and won.
I know,
and
I saw that. Yeah.
That has to be the biggest thing that's ever happened at UNCW, right?
Kind of like App State beating Michigan.
Right. Well, very much the same level. very much the
And
same
Texas
level.
A&M.
Yeah.
Right in.
Yep.
One of the recommendations I would make UNC Wilmington is they need to be more active in like hackathons, for example. So they need to profile their capabilities. Having these little events to kind of really shine on the level of talent and engineering that's coming out of
Yeah.
the schools is really, really
Well,
phenomenal.
they are having some success. I'm on the advisory board for the esports.
Mhm.
So they're having some success there. I don't know if you've come across Carl Risnick yet. Dr. Carl Risnick is
Mm-mm.
a professor at UNCW. He's got a very successful little company called Lapidus Solutions.
Mm.
And what they're doing is they're matching the insurance industry with facial recognition software. They have real clients in Asia that are a little more lax on the privacy issues,
Mm.
but they're getting multi-million dollar contracts and they're
Mm.
hiring some of the best brains that are in Dr. Orisnick's classes. And he goes, "Oh, well, I got a little job for you. Why don't you come on over to
Right.
Lapidus?" Right.
Yeah.
If I may, I think it's a modesty issue, is that Wilmington doesn't promote itself very
Mhm.
much. You sure as don't hear as much about Wilmington as you do about Myrtle Beach. I mean, Myrtle Beach is like a $30 million budget to do tourism marketing.
Right.
You just don't hear the Wilmington
Yeah.
doesn't have that kind of budget to get the word out. And
Right.
again, that's why I'm so active on LinkedIn and any kind of media relations that I can do. Is we have this great relationship with an Atlanta startup news website called Hippopotamus.
Mhm.
We invited her here. She drove all the way on her own dime from Atlanta and wrote a couple stories. And one of the stories was the second most read article of the year in
Mhm.
Atlanta was, how is Wilmington building this ecosystem without the typical innovation resources
Right.
that big cities have? And
Right.
because the people that Live Oak knew in Atlanta, the people in Atlanta were reaching out to Live Oak Bank going, why am I reading about Wilmington and
Mhm.
Atlanta? And my degree is from the journalism school
Mhm.
at the University of Florida, but it's in advertising. It's not in journalism, but
Right.
it came through the journalism.
Right.
So I just use those skills to promote what we're doing
Mhm.
because, again, we don't have a marketing budget. So can I get the press to tell our story
Mhm.
instead?
So from a Wilmington market point of view, is Canopy, they're more fintech related?
They're exclusively fintech.
Okay. And are they funding fintech startups in this market?
Well, they just financed one called Simply. It's
Okay.
SYNPLY, Simply, and they have a $4.8 million seed round, which is pretty impressive.
That's good. That's healthy.
So obviously Encino was a spin out. This is a spin out just like that. Aperture,
Okay.
by the way, is more of a joint venture with a bank out of Atlanta.
Okay. But all
But
have banking roots.
but they're not some of the, like Hanify, they're investing in some of the former employees, even though it may not formally come through
Right.
Canopy or Live Oak. It may come from the executives of the banks
Right.
or funding the entrepreneurial dreams of former employees that they had good relationships with while they
Okay.
were at those companies. But we don't have a lot of independent fintech companies that are just getting started on their own, and Canopy is funding that. We haven't built that cluster yet,
Mhm. What are the
but we could. I mean, that's
Yeah.
certainly something we'd love to do. We would love that to be a magnet. Like,
Mhm.
what if Canopy had their own co-working space that incubated fintech companies
Right.
but Charlotte's trying that, with
With
mixed results.
Okay.
So,
Incubators are really risky, right?
yeah, well, entrepreneurship is a
Yeah.
90% failure
So,
rate,
yeah.
right? So all of it's risky, but that's also kind of the juice of it. It's kind of the energy behind it is.
Right.
But there's a lot of data that says 90% of them fail. But in fact, if you have an incubator that has programming, then you can actually flip that around to where more than 70% of the companies succeed beyond 3 to 5 years,
Mhm.
right? So that's the programming that we're trying to put on. We haven't found success on putting on, let's say, the entrepreneurs come to a class every week.
Mhm.
We haven't found those kind of entrepreneurs. So we can't put on that kind of programming. So instead, we try to do the programming through our events,
Right.
through our monthly events. And we have events on sales and marketing and how to raise capital and really, I listen to the entrepreneurs in the ecosystem that say, I need to learn about this. And if I
Mhm.
hear that 3 times in a week,
Mhm.
then I put on an event and we make it happen. And I
Right.
call up whatever people that I know from around the state and say, hey, we knew each other 5 years ago. I can fill a room.
Mhm.
Can I invite you to on this Thursday night to come down to the coast?
You get really good turnout on your events.
We have the highest turnout in the whole state. And I
Really?
know that's really hard to believe if you're in Charlotte or if you're in Raleigh, Durham. The thing is, in Raleigh, Durham, there are 40 organizations that do what I do. So it's very fragmented.
40.
There's 40.
Okay.
Think about every co-working space, every incubator, every university has a co-working space. They have events.
Mhm.
You have all these different organizations. So, and then they have vertical events. So an event like Riot. So it's the Raleigh Internet of Things.
Mhm.
Their vertical is, if you have a device that has data on it, come to our events. So
Mhm.
it's, it's verticalized that way. We
Mhm.
don't quite have a vertical industry. So our events are very broad
Mhm.
to a broad range of companies and entrepreneurs.
So there's other people within like Raleigh, Charlotte, Greenville, Asheville that do what you do as far as like really trying to incentivize and build out this ecosystem. Do you communicate with those individuals or do you compete?
Well, it's very
How's the
interesting. Keep in
relationship?
mind, I started the first entrepreneur council in Charlotte. I
Right.
started the very first entrepreneur council in Asheville.
Asheville. Yeah.
So I've worked with these people for the last 25 years. And
Mhm.
again, I'm a big Irish personality. You can hear
Right.
from me from across the room.
Yeah.
You don't have to stand on us, to find me. You can go
Right.
find the guy, the bald guy, the big bald guy, or the guy in the hat.
Yeah.
And I'm usually the only one of those two, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you point and I'm tall and I'm bald or I'm wearing my hat, or you can hear me, as we said earlier, I'm
Right.
very loud.
Yeah.
And that's not intentional. It's just who I am.
Mhm.
So I'm very visible at these events. And so these people, they kind of begrudgingly say, Jim's over there, go talk to Jim.
Yeah.
It's kind of that bullying friendship that men have of,
Mhm.
these people are my friends. When I support their events and I ask them to support my events, it's an
Mhm.
exchange.
I mean, but look, North Carolina always ranks high in the CNBC,
Yeah, that's business.
best
That's more
business.
mature
Yeah.
business. Think about it this way, and this is something that needs to change is 80% of the venture capital, and that's what matters. The venture capital in North Carolina is in the triangle.
Mhm.
And no matter how much Charlotte tries to change that, it's still 80%.
Mhm.
So how do we I'm not trying to take money out of the triangle, but we sure would like to spread it around through the rest of the
Well,
state.
why? Why does Triangle get 80%?
It's a mature ecosystem, so they know the lawyers know how to guide the entrepreneurs down the path. There's
Is it a workforce because they hire from
Oh,
Duke, NC
sure,
State,
sure. I mean,
UNC?
well, the joke is that Duke people go back to New Jersey, right? It's the University of New Jersey at
Yeah.
Durham,
Yeah.
right? So Duke, it's well known that I think it's only 20% of Duke grads stay in the North Carolina after graduation, but
Mhm.
the other two, they mostly are from North Carolina, so
Right.
they're mostly staying.
Yeah.
And again, it's very cheap for them.
Mhm.
There was no economy when I graduated from University of Florida in Gainesville. It
Mhm.
was only the university.
Mhm.
What do they call that? A land grant university. So
Mhm.
there's nothing around it. Like Energizer was the only company that I can even remember
Yeah.
that wasn't related to the university.
Yeah.
So you kind of had to leave.
Mhm.
Well, again, if you're a senior at NC State and you graduate, you can just keep your apartment. You
Mhm.
don't have to move. And your cost of living is low. You get a job at Red Hat, you're making 6 figures.
Mhm.
You're living pretty good, right?
Right.
We don't yeah, that's not what was happening here in 2013.
Are there more, resources for startups in
There's
Raleigh?
unlimited resources. I mean, again,
That's
the
compared to
Raleigh
Wilmington.
Durham area, that organization that I'm trying to replicate is
Mhm.
40 years old. They just had their 40th birthday,
Okay.
right? So they have added these resources that the ecosystem needed,
Mhm.
but they're also there because of the universities. The
Mhm.
universities have their own resources, so the ecosystem can use that. the RTP, the Research Triangle Park, is the original research park in the world. The world has traveled to Durham, North Carolina to see what this thing is called a research park. And that is an unbelievable amount of talent that has stayed in the Triangle. And that's the original purpose. That was the only purpose of the Research Triangle Park is why do UNC and NC State grads keep moving away? When, I don't know if you know this, but when Research Triangle Park was designed and created, North Carolina was the second poorest state in the United States behind Mississippi. The second. And now it's the #1 pro-business state in America, right? It's changed. And the Research Triangle Park has a lot to do with that. I sure would like some of that to come east, right? And again, there's a new organization, I'm not sure you're familiar with it, called NC Innovation. They got $500 million from the state legislature to commercialize more research out of state universities. And they're actually using that money now. They've given a lab at UNCW, the Wang Lab, Dr. Wong, sorry. It's spelled Wang, but it's pronounced Wong, Dr. Wong, which is where my favorite intern works, is Carson Jackson. You may remember during the pandemic, we were shipping vaccines over to third world countries. The problem was they had no cold storage. So Dr. Wong is working on how can you ship these vaccines to third world countries without needing any cold storage. And so some very interesting technology. So this NC Innovation is now invested in that lab to develop more technologies that can be commercialized and again, enrich the coast of North Carolina. So how can you build an innovation ecosystem east of I-95? That's something we've tried to do, but this is with that much money that can really have a bigger impact.
RTP really was anchored by the universities, NC State, UNC, Duke. You'd imagine.
Yes. And one of the very first organizations is called RTI, Research Triangle Institute International, which I think has 2,500 employees, and 80% of them have a graduate degree, PhD level degrees. So yes, they've done a great job of retaining and attracting brains.
Do you believe UNC Wilmington could ever replicate that and build its own research park if it had the funding or motivation from the state?
I mean, one is, where would it go? I don't know if you know this, but New Hanover County is actually the second smallest county of the 100 counties of North Carolina. So geographically, the second smallest county of 100 counties. So where would that go? Two, again, where would the money come from? I should send you this article, and I get in trouble every time I mention it, which is why I'm going to mention it. There's a great magazine called The Assembly. It's a new magazine. It's probably the best journalist in the state of North Carolina. But when the New Hanover Endowment was announced, the article said that per capita, New Hanover County barely gives more than $1,000 a year to nonprofits, donations. If you compare that to the Winston-Salem area, that was $7,000 per capita. I'm sorry, that was Buncombe County. And the Winston-Salem area is more like $12,000, which is old textile, tobacco money. So it's a different level of wealth. But where would that money come from to develop these infrastructure pieces that are needed? So no one has an answer for that. And we certainly need to find who those people are that would have a vested interest in growing an innovation economy. Again, something I get in trouble. If you look at the buildings at UNCW, chemistry building, the name on it is usually a real estate name. That's how wealth was earned in this area for decades and a century, whatever, right? But we need a new set of industries that can create wealth, that hopefully one of those people or multiple people have a philanthropic bent, that they go, this area was responsible for me being successful, so I'm going to give back and pay it forward. So we keep these bright minds here. Eventually it's an emotional appeal. Like, do you want your grandchildren to live near you? So you create the jobs that your children want, and they can stay in the area, so the grandchildren get great jobs too. And that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to keep the people here that want to live here.
Do you think UNC Wilmington is teaching current curriculum demand? Like, for example, are they teaching Java, C++, or are they teaching Salesforce? Or are they teaching Amazon Web Services? Like, are they using current technology?
I think they're doing a better job than they were before the CIE opened of learning what the
Yeah.
employers, they're communicating with those employers on the skills that are needed.
Yeah.
We got multiple calls from Encino saying, hey, can
We
you
need-
guys
yeah.
find someone to put on Salesforce classes because we're overwhelmed with it. So
Right.
can we fund something at the university where you guys teach
Yeah,
Salesforce?
that's been a big problem. I believe, based on some anecdotal data and personal experience that I've had, where you're talking to universities and you're saying, hey, guess what? These are the skills that are needed in today's workforce. You know, are you teaching these?
Right.
No.
Right.
Why? Well, because our tenured professor,
Right.
you know, is teaching the same technology that they taught 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
And it's fundamental. Like, okay, it could be fundamental, but it's not transformational. It's like we have to have transformational technology today.
Mhm.
Like, do you have an AWS? Are you teaching cybersecurity?
Right.
Are you teaching data science? You know,
Right.
some of the foundational skills that are going to be used tomorrow, you know, you should be teaching that today.
But I think that needs to be a public-private partnership. I think the company's got to put some resources to make that happen, because I don't know how well connected UNCW is to the state legislature to say, hey, we need an extra $2 million this year to build this program.
Right.
And their thing is, well, NC State has that program. You know, we don't want you to conflict the students with the engineering program. And the things that I hear, that's why UNC Chapel Hill doesn't have an engineering program, because there's one there right there at NC State. So
Yeah. Well,
how politically lobbying,
yeah.
you know, how much strength do you have to make that happen on
Yeah.
the state level? And, you know, we're still trying to tell our story that, you know, the Wilmington economy has changed.
Mhm.
Besides my posts about it, I don't think a lot of people are talking about Wilmington as the number 2 ecosystem in the North Carolina, or the number 1 ecosystem in the world for cities under 300,000 people. I don't know
Right.
that even our own legislators at the coastal area or the city leaders can tell you
Yeah.
that stat.
Right.
But I'm working behind the scenes to communicate to their people
Right.
that they have the ear
Yeah.
of those leaders to say, can you send them this new animation that I just had made that's
Yeah.
90 seconds long?
Right.
That's the attention span of a gnat, I hope. That if you just watch how this was done over the last 10 years, then maybe we can get some resources behind it, because
But
we're having an impact.
yeah.
We're raising the profile of the region. I think not only do we have these ecosystem rankings, but we were the number 7 city in America for job growth and salary growth.
Mm.
And we were number 51 in America on a technology index score, which number 51 may not be impressive, but
Mhm.
we were the 158th city for population.
Mhm.
So if you're number 51, you know, I'd like to say if you're the 10th biggest city, you shouldn't rank under 10th in anything positive, right?
Right.
So if you're number 51, but your population is at 158, then you're really doing something right. And
Right.
and again, I like to emphasize that I know that Live Oak Bank and Encino and Aperture are doing the majority of that heavy lifting with Canopy,
Mhm.
but we're doing the companies of tomorrow, and we're trying to get them to match that kind of growth in
Right.
the future.
Well, because-
we believe in Opioid. We think
Yeah.
that could be, if they got some additional funding, they could
Right.
be a 100-person company that
Right.
pays 6-figure salaries.
Right. Well, it goes back to the original intent. Why you went to Asheville.
Right.
Instead of recruiting people to come,
Right.
let's build out that ecosystem. And whenever you're looking at building the ecosystem of the future, it does start with the workforce and the skills and the capability that you're generating from that area. And the pandemic, you know, probably did shift a lot of people's mindset. And now people working remotely, and maybe they're, you know, thinking about lifestyle a little more than they had before in the past.
But that's not a negative to Wilmington,
No, it's a
because if you can
positive.
work
Yeah.
remotely from watching the ocean
Yeah.
and watching a sunrise and a sunset on the other side of the building,
No, I
then
mean,
We have a lot of remote workers. The
Yeah.
challenge is, can we engage those people
Mhm.
to share their knowledge? Or
Yeah.
if that job goes away, do we have a job for them when they're ready to work locally?
Yeah. For example, I met a very smart engineer at your event, several weeks ago. He lives in North Topsail
Mhm.
and he works as a semiconductor engineer, but he's remote. His job's in New
Right.
York,
Right.
so
Right.
he's dialing in from a computer
Right.
every day in North Carolina to work a
Right.
job in New York. So, yeah, I mean, North Carolina and this coastal region, absolutely is building momentum from people being able to work remote and use those technologies. But the point is that we have to have a cooperation from public and private to make sure that we build the infrastructure and we have the capabilities and the skill sets and everything's in alignment, that your efforts
Yeah.
are being matched by the efforts of the school and their efforts are being matched by the state. And then, that we're all buying into the same story and the same energy.
I think the majority of the messages at the leadership level locally is still about real estate. It's still about building
In this
100
area.
new homes. It's about
Yeah.
building some new condos, about building some apartments, or it's about building a new strip center. And the message of the innovation economy, again, outside of Live Oak, because they can demand that kind of respect and
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
We still need to get our messages through, and we've
Yeah.
yet to really find a way to do that.
Yeah. So tell me about your whale fund. I know
Yeah.
matching some of the efforts of
Yeah.
Canopy and Live
Yeah.
Oak and some other things. You're also investing in
So we
some
have
of
a very small angel network. It's not a fund, but it's an angel network where the individual investors invest their own money. So we don't have a bank account that has $1 million in it that we invest. We have a membership that the angels pay on an annual an annual basis, and I find the deal flow, and most of it's local. The last 4 or 5 investments have been local,
Okay.
but we've made some We made one investment in Myrtle Beach with a military veteran that got involved when I started the local Bunker Labs chapter for veterans who want to become entrepreneurs.
Right.
Started coming to our events, and one of our investors invested in that company. We've got a couple companies, because I'm so involved in the Triangle ecosystem, that these are deals that I thought were really good. And maybe one of our investors had some experience in the industry, and I approach the investor and say, there's a company, that's doing supply chain. They've got some real progress. So the guy with the supply chain company in Chapel Hill, that's actually our most experienced entrepreneur, has some gray hair.
Yeah.
It's not a 23, 24-year-old, that just graduated that has a social media app, so we've made 19 investments, and we try to obviously encourage the investors to have some dry powder so they can invest in later rounds as well.
Do you have a minimum, usually check size from your
Well,
not
the
limited partners?
entrepreneurs really kind of set what the minimum is. And
Okay.
since we're still really young in this process, it is usually a $25,000 per investor.
Okay.
Actually, sometimes the investors go together to create the $25,000, but have certainly invested 6 figures in later rounds, depending on the company's success.
Does the investment come from the fund, your whale, or
No.
the individual?
The individual. I don't touch
So-
their money at all. So
if there's 6,
and I'm not an investor. I like to
Right.
be really clear on that.
Yeah.
We just discussed my
Right.
20-year career, and
Right,
none of
right.
it was adding up to much
Yeah.
independently wealthy kind of
Yeah.
status. So
Right.
I'm not an investor. I simply manage the process of finding the companies, finding the individual investors, and communicating on a weekly basis what's happening in the ecosystem within those companies. And I get their reports on a weekly or monthly basis. The process of going from ideation to exit has certainly been elongated. Was a 5 to 7 year process. It's probably now a 7 to 10 year process.
Yeah.
And if you add the pandemic to that, it's probably going to be longer. So
Yeah.
it's of no one's fault. It's just the market is. That's what's happened in the
we're
marketplace.
seeing a shift, from an expectation of return of capital, from like a 3 to 6 is now more 8 to 10.
Right.
Yeah. So it's people haven't become more patient for return of capital.
Investors aren't very patient people,
But
as you know.
Just a little bit, which is why I'm not taking outside money right now. It's only mine.
Right.
As a comparison to what you're doing, I joined what is a super angel fund, right? where you have limited partners and you pull your money together. So your investment comes from one entity, and the split is 5% carry and 5% to the deal leads. So if you had a network of 20, then you would, one or two would be the lead, and they would be the one that would come back and report and give everybody the
Right.
updates. But
Right.
the key is they get 5%.
Right.
They split between the leads, and that's been pretty successful.
I just don't want to handle the investors' money. I just,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of expense
Really
to
what we're
that.
trying to do is
Yeah.
we're trying to be the first money in, so our entrepreneurs
Yeah.
can take and say, look, I did
Yeah.
raise
Right.
capital in Wilmington, and they can go to the other markets, because the biggest red flag for an investor in Raleigh is a Wilmington startup that
Yeah.
says, I'm here to raise money. And the first question is, well,
Right.
who invested in Wilmington that I can call?
Yeah. Is it usually seed
If the
round?
answer is no, yes.
Yeah. Like
If the answer is no, no one invested in Wilmington, that's a red flag,
yeah.
because they, again,
Yeah.
they know me, and I'm going to be their call. And
Okay.
why didn't you invest in this company? Well, they're kind of known around town as
Yeah.
being a pain in the backside. So
Yeah, right.
we've
Yeah.
decided not to deal with that.
Right.
Right. We know that's a red flag, and
Yeah.
here's some other things of why we didn't invest. And
Yeah.
I get those calls on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So-and-so reached out. Well, this is why they're not finding any luck in
Yeah.
Wilmington. Because I got to answer those people.
Right.
Like when I have a good company and I approach them,
Yeah.
they need to know that I'm providing thorough information.
Right.
If something backfires because
Yeah.
I didn't tell them, then
Yeah.
I can't go back to that investor.
Right. So what's the future? Where do you see the next 5, 10 years? What does it look like?
I would really love to have a facility that I can run on a daily basis. I'd like to get to a point where we have that kind of support, that whether it's a co-working space for the portfolio of Whale, or a space that we can have our own events, because we have great events, and eventually, people get tired of me taking the advantage of their free offering. Sure, you can use our space, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
I would love to have a place where I can invite people to come and work for the day. And if an investor comes to town, I can say, hey, we've got this co-working space. And if not, would you do some office hours? Would you hold 3 hours worth of meetings with companies that are in the space that can sign up for time slots? And that's what I would like to do. I don't see that happening for, I have no inkling that that's going to happen.
Right.
But if I had a dream, I just went to an event at this place in Raleigh that has a huge office campus, and they have their own event space. And it was just this dream facility it looked like a barn, but it could fit 150 people, and it had all the AV, and like, man, I sure wish I had that as an asset for our organization.
Right.
We'd love to have an exit, obviously, with Whale. We'd love to have someone within New, again, with all respect to Live Oak and their success, we'd love to have more exits just within the New membership.
Right.
Because, again, that's more validation that we're doing the right things to take these companies from ideation to exit. We've invested a lot of time in the companies in the portfolio and the members, and really the thing that the market understands is that signage on the NASDAQ board that somebody's ringing the bell today and they're from Wilmington, and it raises our profile. I would love to be recognized as the second greatest ecosystem in our own state. I would love more people to, hey, Jim, I heard this today. Is that true? I can say, here's the proof,
Right.
But it's going to be interesting that next week is the NCIDEA Ecosystem Summit. So all the ecosystem nerds like me are all from across the state going to be in Charlotte or Concord, North Carolina for the annual Ecosystem Summit.
Right.
And I would love to, hey, Jim, I heard that data,
Right.
why are you poking fun of Charlotte so much? I'm like, well, I think I've earned the right to poke fun of Charlotte. And
you've been very instrumental to this market.
Yeah.
One way or another. I mean, you brought all your success and energy dating back to your dad as a kid, and the coaching and the leadership and all the other success and momentum. So it's very well recognized. So congratulations on all that. And we look forward to seeing future success in this market.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks again for coming.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Amplified CEO is produced by Topsail Insider. edited by Jim Mendez-Pouget, and sponsored by Cape Fear Ventures. For more information about Amplified CEO, Richard Stroop, or Cape Fear Ventures, please contact Krista at 910-800-0111 or Krista at topsailinsider.com.